Welcome everyone to the first episode of the Hall of Fame series of podcasts on the Wake Up podcast. It's been a while since I've recorded anything, but I'm doing something new. I'm going to do a series of open-ended discussions that are kind of like almost in the spirit of what I did with Bitcoin Time. So some timeless pieces that aren't in your traditional podcast format where you've got an interviewer interviewing a guest. These are all going to have 3 people on them. It's going to be myself and 2 others, and they'll be really special edition. They're going to be much longer form, so we'll probably go anywhere between 2 to 3 hours. If we go longer, we'll probably split it up into 2 parts. And the idea is to just really philosophize and discuss deep ideas and themes. And the first one we're doing is called The Cosmic Call. And of course, I've got 2 legends who are going to be on this call with me. Number 1 is Robert Breedlove, and I'm sure you all know him. And number 2 is the Invisible Man, Gigi. You'll know what I mean if you're actually watching this in video format. You'll laugh your ass off. The guy's an absolute genius. So in this discussion, I think hands down, I'm not sure, but this may be the best pod you will listen to this year and maybe this decade. Like, I really enjoyed it, and that's not to blow smoke up our asses. Like, we really went deep. We covered sort of Bitcoin from a lens of physics, from metaphysics, duality, singularity, first principles, morals, ethics. We looked at what the future might look like, what's dangerous today, how Bitcoin combats tyranny, the yin-yang aspect. And we even capped off with like a treasure trove, I would say, of resources that you guys can all look through later. So books, people we admire and aspire toward. We could have probably gone for 6 hours. So we're definitely going to do a Cosmic Call number 2, but jump on this one. Subscribe to the channel, obviously, whatever you're listening to on, whether it's podcast, Spotify, Apple, Google, whatever it is, or YouTube, and share this one around. I really hope you guys enjoy it, and stay tuned for the series of Hall of Fame pods that I'm going to do in the coming months. So, Robert Breedlove and the man, the Invisible Man, Gigi, on the call with me today. Boys, welcome.
Hey, so glad to be here.
Where's here?
Yeah, you spoke up first, so it's a first for me as well. First time appearing in front of a camera. So yep. I hope this goes well. Really good to have you on.
Nowhere, just like Bitcoin. And Svetski, thank you for having us. This is awesome.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. Look, just to give everyone some context, so for all the listeners, I'm going to do a series of these with a bunch of special guests, and it's I don't know how long term I'm going to do this, but I just want to make like similar to what I've done in the past with the Bitcoin Times, and but both of these guys have contributed to that, is like timeless pieces. So I want to make this a timeless conversation, less about what's happening today and all this sort of shit, but more about like open-ended questions. So I'm just gonna kick off the discussion. Like, just before we were talking about entropy. So I know Rob was picking Gigi's mind on this. So being that it's a cosmic call, and being that of all cosmic topics, entropy is one of the most, if not the deepest. Rob, do you want to take off on some questions or some thoughts that you've been having around entropy, time, Bitcoin, any of that sort of stuff?
Yeah. I have been thinking, so I'm getting a little feedback on your microphone.
On mine?
I think so. You turn your volume down a little bit.
Yeah, cool. I'll mute myself.
As I mentioned before we started recording, I've been thinking a lot about the relationship between entropy and money. And I guess to lay the foundation on definition, so entropy is perhaps the most confounding topic in the world, or at least in physics. In general, we can think of entropy as uncertainty, randomness, chaos. It is the measurement of disorderliness in a system. And entropy is the only element of the universe that points towards the flow of time. So all physical processes in the universe are symmetric. They can be run forwards and backwards, and you can't tell which direction time is flowing unless you measure the entropy. The second law of thermodynamics is the arrow of time. So the entropy, the disorderliness of any closed system tends to increase over time. And that's in fact how we define time. And I connect this because money is basically an insurance policy on the uncertainty of the future. Meaning you can use money as a claim on the totality of human savings, energy, capital, and attention to resolve a problem. And so money in that sense is negentropic or anti-entropic. It is actually a tool we use to deal with uncertainty, right? That's why you hold a cash balance and it doesn't yield a return, because you don't know what you're going to need it for, right? It's an instrument of pure optionality in the marketplace. And it's intimately related, I think, with consciousness too, because if we think that, why is it that consciousness experiences a flow of time? And we can think of it like this. So information itself is defined as the resolution of entropy, right? So there's something that's uncertain to us. When we resolve that uncertainty, we can say that is information. So consciousness itself is like this information foraging awareness, if you will. And money is an extension of consciousness, right? Like we're communicating with one another through the price signal. I don't need to know the history of soybeans, or that there's been a fire in China or something that's increased the price of soybeans. All of the collective sovereign conscious expressions of market actors are compressed and encapsulated in the market price, right? So it is a form of economic telecommunications. And this is all moving through money. So money is like this, I don't know, ethereal medium of consciousness expressed in the sphere of economics.
Yeah, I like to call it like a fabric that binds us. Like a fabric that binds everything. But yeah, keep going.
Yeah, like a trust fabric or something. So we're left with that. I mean, we're left with entropy is the force of the universe that substantiates the flow of time. The only things that run countervailing to entropy are life or consciousness, conscious life, if you will. Money, right, which is a tool, an extension of conscious life. And we could say information. Like information is the resolution of entropy. So as the unknown flows into the known, when it passes that sphere of uncertainty into certainty, that is information, right? Information could also be defined as surprise. So if we know a certain pattern to something, if I know 1 + 1 = 2, if you show me 1 + 1 = 2, there's no information there for me. I already have it encoded into my realm of knowledge. So there's all that. And then if you look at central banking through that lens, and I'm really out on a ledge here, so feel free to help me think more correctly. But
yeah,
looking at central banking through that lens of entropy, what I see they are doing is it's a private institution that has monopolized the control of money. They can centrally dictate and manage its supply to their own political will. It's a private institution with private shareholders. By increasing the money supply, they are effectively increasing the certainty for their shareholders. So they're sucking wealth off of everyone else. They're stealing money, if you will, from everyone else by printing money, right? This is the Cantillon effect, or whatever you want to call it, the redistributive effects of money production. But by the laws of thermodynamics, we know entropy cannot be created nor destroyed. So by decreasing their own entropy or increasing their own certainty,
they're
they are
shifting it.
externalizing
Yep.
entropy onto society at large in the form of inflation, social unrest. I would argue moral decomposition and warfare, right? So this is the limb I'm on today. I would love to be able to bring this argument home and root it in first principles that the central bank is this institution of externalizing entropy. And if we can remove it and remove this parasite from ourselves, then we can go back to being a globally coordinated free market society that externalizes entropy into the universe, right? Instead of externalizing it from the central bank around the world, we can actually protect the world, increase certainty for the world by externalizing entropy into the universe.
Gigi, I want to throw this over to you, but I just want to touch on two things there that Rob said. So, Rob, while you're talking about entropy and the passage of time, one of the things that clicked to me, and I think actually you mentioned this book to me or someone else, I can't remember, but Carlo Rovelli, the 7 Brief Lessons of Physics.
Oh yeah, that's a great book. Yeah.
So in there he talks about how heat is, effectively like we don't even understand how heat functions,
Right.
except that it's about entropy sort of taking hold, and that's how we start to define it. So for anyone who wants to sort of study that, there's a great little book by Carlo Rovelli, it's called the 7 Brief Lessons of Physics, right? Or
7 Brief Lessons of Physics, and he has another one called The Order
of Time. Which
is really good. Actually, that's a great analogy, because when I was thinking about this, like that's what an air conditioner or a refrigerator is. It externalizes entropy. So you put your hand in the fridge and it's cold, but behind the fridge it's hot as fuck, right?
Yep.
So that's what this institution is it's like an air conditioner or a refrigerator. It's making itself more comfortable, but externalizing heat into the socioeconomic sphere.
Exactly. So this is I think a really important point there that many people don't understand, is that every this comes back to Newton's third law, right? Every action has a reaction. So when we're doing something, like there's always an externality of some sort, and this is what central bankers and central planners and things like that fail to comprehend, is that they think that by coming in and pressing a button here, that they can solve something in isolation without consequence to the whole.
Right.
And this is where we we sort of lose ourselves. So I think that was one point I wanted to touch. And then you reminded me of something else there about money reducing uncertainty. So I'm halfway through writing an article called Capitalism Reduces Uncertainty. And I think that perfectly aligns with what you just mentioned there, because capitalism as a mechanism for cooperation is close to, in my mind at least, natural order. And the reason we sort of we've converged as a species onto capitalism as a way to do things is that we know we live in a world of finite resources, a finite time, and of an uncertain future. And when you sort of wrap that in this, and I was talking about this with Max Kaiser the other day, we wrap those 3 truths in this final truth, which is we're all individuals, we're all sovereign individuals, and we all value everything subjectively on an individual basis. Like, how are we able to fucking cooperate without all killing each other? And what we kind of converge on is this idea of how do we most efficiently use these resources? How do we have some sort of natural law, like the most natural law amongst cooperative human beings is private property, starting with yourself and then extending from there. And with those sort of primitives, we look at we find that capitalism is a mechanism for us to manage finite resources and uncertainty of the future by by creating like capital base with which to move forward from. So I think that's a really, really important point. I've got something else I want to dig in there. I don't know if you've got any comments on that, Rob, or should we throw this over to Gigi to get some comments?
I would just add one thing to what you just said, and it's a bit paradoxical because capitalism better resolves uncertainty, but capitalism itself is a bit uncertain, right? It's very experimental. So the way I like to think about this is the economy is designed to solve problems, right? To satisfy wants, right? We're all playing this game to cooperate and compete to satisfy wants, and we're learning in the process. To maximize our ability to solve problems, we don't need any specific plan or model. Actually, what we need is to optimize for problem solvers, right?
Yes.
So we need to leave people as free as possible to figure the shit out that they know and specialize. And that's what capitalism represents, right? It's just minimal rules. It's don't hurt each other, don't kill each other, don't steal from each other. You know, basic tenets of morality. Go out and create. So we've got to get back to that. We've got to get back to natural law to
Absolutely.
solve.
I mean, problem solving by definition is removing uncertainty, like fundamentally speaking, and that's why, yeah. So spot on. Gigi, let's throw this over to you, man. You being the man who wrote that article about entropy, and actually it was the Bitcoin Times, right? That's what we published.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think it's fascinating that Rob is digging into this deeply. I keep looping back to entropy all the time when it comes to Bitcoin, and I wrote about it in the past. I'm currently writing my second book, and I've been working for the last couple of weeks on a chapter on how Bitcoin is time, and not only how Bitcoin is time in the time is money sense, like in the sense of stored economic energy, but also how Bitcoin is only possible because it is a distributed time-stamping server. And this was the main problem that was unsolved. How can you tell time in a distributed system? And it's a very, very tricky problem. And as Rob correctly said, entropy and time and information are intrinsically linked. Like I would even go as far as saying they're pretty much the same thing. It's just like 2 or 3 sides of the same coin. And we can see that easily in the informational realm. You have no way of telling time if you can reverse every action. Like, for example, if you take a Git repository, how it changes over time, and you can just go back in time again. You can't really tell what happened before and what happened after, and you can always cheat very easily. And that was one of the problems that Bitcoin solved, that it introduced a way how to bring entropy, so to speak, into the digital realm, how to build a time-stamping server that cannot be meddled with, just like in the real world. Like if you have a physical natural process, like, scrambling an egg, you can't unscramble that egg. It's just so improbable, and that's the only thing that's holding you up. It's very improbable to unscramble that egg. In the same way, you have an entropic building block in Bitcoin, which is generating the hashes included from the previous block, and you can't predict the previous block. That's why it works. You can't predict all the transactions that people will put into the previous block and who's going to mine it and so on and so forth. So you build up this chain in time, and that's why I'm also a time chain maximalist. It always was a time chain, and if you don't understand that, you haven't understood Bitcoin. and so it is this ingenious way of kind of destroying information and just scrambling up information in a way so that you have an arrow of time and you can't argue with the arrow of time in Bitcoin. And it's also, it builds up its own history by definition. It's just, whatever has the most proof of work in it is by definition the history. And all of that kind of leads back to entropy. And I also thought it's interesting how Rob mentioned that the only thing that counteracts entropy is life and money and information, and Bitcoin is all three. Like in my mind, Bitcoin is a life form, and it's a very weird one, but it's a life form nonetheless. And it is information. It is pure information. People often talk about how Bitcoin is digital scarcity, and in one sense this is true, but in another sense this also isn't true. It still is information. You can't copy every single thing in Bitcoin. Like you can copy private keys, you can copy the whole UTXO set, you can copy the code, you can copy everything. It's just that it is a system that performs this intricate dance that makes invalid copies useless. And so Satoshi hasn't found a way to make digital information non-copyable. That's not it. He has found a way to build a system to orchestrate a dance that makes invalid copies completely useless and completely worthless. And I think thinking about all that through the lens of entropy and life is insanely useful, because it just explains so much, and it also explains why it wasn't possible before.
I love the notion there of a dance, and how, like, I always say to people, one of the things that is beautiful about Bitcoin is that it is fundamentally just open information that anybody can copy. But Bitcoin's openness is actually its defense, which is it's another one of those paradoxical elements about it, right? So it's like, traditionally when we think about defense, we think about like a border or a wall or something like that. And I'm fundamentally for the idea of boundaries, so territory and private property and all that sort of stuff. But somehow Bitcoin's managed to manifest the notion of a point of truth by making its defense, like by inverting its defensive mechanism, by saying, all right, you can copy it, and you can go off and create Bitcoin Gigi's version or Bitcoin Svetski's version, which also is Bitcoin SV, by the way. It's the real Bitcoin SV, or Breedlove's version or whatever, so like, and no one's going to give a fuck, maybe a few groupies, but it's that's one of the things also that fries my noodle, is that there's nothing anybody can do to copy it, like, because they can copy it. So yeah,
we saw this play out, and there were many theories about it. Like, it was interesting to be part of the time where like no forks existed, and nobody kind of knew what was going to happen. And there were some theories that it's going to splinter in this million different forks, and all of them will have some worth and so on. But it seems that just isn't true at all. Like, it's the main analogy I like in terms of network effects, because it's so intuitively obvious, is shipping containers. And I know, like Bitcoin and shipping containers, they have a history in terms of that you should see Bitcoin transactions more as shipping containers than, like envelopes. But if you've ever been to a big harbor, or if you've ever been at the Panama Canal and just looked at all the infrastructure that is built around the standard default shipping container, like, it has one size, and every single harbor in the world, and all the trains and all the lorries that transport them and so on and so forth, all the cranes, they are all fitted for this one shipping container. And this is the network effect of the shipping container. If you come into the marketplace and are like, I have a shipping container that has twice the volume and has twice the size, or whatever have you, like, you've already lost. It makes no sense at all for anyone to adopt this. And the same is true in Bitcoin. It makes no sense to adopt another network. It only, like, everything is fighting for liquidity, and the most liquid good becomes money. And that's why networks tend to win. That's why especially money tends to win. And what most people overlook also, because many people, or some people, argue that you can just switch to another thing and blah blah blah. And there are many standards that can coexist and so on. And in some sense, this is true sometimes. I don't think this will ever be true for free money. Like, you can't store your value in two things at the same time. While for communication, for example, I can send you a message on Telegram and on Twitter and on email and what have you, and on WhatsApp. So it's way more coexistence is way more possible in the realm of communication, and it's not at all possible in the realm of money, because it's such a direct competition. And I just feel like many people that still have hang-ups about this, they loop back to the same nonsensical arguments that you can have just many things at once, and they ignore that the network effects in money are especially strong.
Well, let's dig into that one a little bit. I actually have a question here. I want to talk about can we one day reverse entropy? But before we go there, let's dig into this this notion of tending to one, particularly for money, and why that's really important. Because you just mentioned communication is easier to splinter. We can all send each other messages on Telegram or WhatsApp and all that sort of shit. But money as a because again, as you guys probably do, and as many people do, is like money is like communication network, but it's not communicating just verbal speech, right? It's communicating time and energy through some sort of substrate that permeates society. Like I always tell people that no matter what we do, a group of people that are coexisting are always going to create money. It's not that money that we're ever going to transcend money. Money's always going to exist. The question is in what form, and how accurately does it embody or represent what money actually is, which is sort of the product of our labor, and by extension, or by deduction, sorry, that the product of our labor is effectively time and energy. So why is it? I mean, I'll throw this to whoever wants to sort of take a dig at this first. But why is it that this kind of communication medium or this kind of network tends to one or converges to unity?
I'll have a quick stab at it and then I'll hand it over to Rob. But I think it's kind of obvious if you think about it in the time and stored time sense, like in the same way that you can't do 5 things at once and you can't be in 5 places at once. Like you cannot store the fruits of your labor in multiple things at once. You cannot store your value in multiple things. Like if you have a data file, for example, you can store it on a USB stick, you can store it on your laptop, you can store it in the cloud. Like that's fine. There's no problem there. But if you have $1 million, you can't store it in like the same million in Bitcoin and in bottles of whiskey and in expensive cars and in real estate and in the stock market. You have to make a definitive decision. And if there is something that's obviously better, and historically this has been money, if you ignore investments that bring yield, then it makes no sense. Like it's impossible to store your money in 15 different currencies, like the same $1 million. And I think it's just obvious that the network effects, just for that alone, are way stronger there.
Yeah, awesome. Rob, did you have anything you wanted to add to that, man?
Yeah. So I'd like to actually dig in a little bit to what Gigi was saying earlier, and then I'll build up to the coalescing towards one money. So I think it's fascinating that it's as if Satoshi created a mechanism that established the immutable, irreversible, universal flow of time in digital space, right? That is what, like we commonly say, he solved the double spend problem, or he made a money that's uninflatable, or it can't be counterfeit. This is all the same thing, right? If you're double spending, if you're counterfeiting, or if you're inflating, you're basically breaking the laws of time for that money, right? You're circumventing a trade-off, right? You only have one unit of time and energy that you can expend. If you expend it twice, then you've broken the rules somewhere. So he figured out a rule set that preserved, it just perfectly reflected the flow of time. So in a lot of ways, I think it wins as money because it most perfectly reflects thermodynamics, right? It respects thermodynamic principles. And I think it's interesting as well that each block is resolution of uncertainty, right? That's what it is. The miners are competing to resolve the uncertainty of the puzzle, right? Whoever finds the winning piece to the puzzle basically is awarded, or rewarded, I should say. And that is forging this inarguable time chain, right? That is more or less a proxy for the thermodynamic arrow of time, right? So there's something it's like we've dug very deep into the fundamental state of nature to create something that most closely emulates it. And I like that Bitcoin is life, information, and money, and that invalid copies are worthless, right? So now we get into the philosophical domain. So Bitcoin is actively discarding falsehood, right? Anything you throw at it that's not honest, it's discarded.
Yeah, I like that.
Right, and it's like what's the quote about the artist that the artist's creation is perfected when he's taken away everything that's imperfect.
That's
right?
imperfect, yeah.
So that's what Bitcoin is, like this masterpiece of honesty and truthfulness. And again, if we consider truth, if we define truth, as an accurate portrayal of reality, right? We're back to that same definition that we had. This time chain is the thermodynamic arrow of time. Thermodynamics is the deepest reality we know, right? It's how physics describes the flow of time. And I'm fascinated as well that this resolving of deep uncertainty, right? The mining algorithm is akin to finding a single atom in the universe. By resolving deep uncertainty, we're producing deep truth, right? We produce this deep truth of absolute scarcity. And it is just so fascinating from so many different angles. And so it's like Bitcoin is time or is truth, right? It just doesn't tolerate anything false. That's why I think it forces people to be humble and accountable, because that's how you have to be to accord yourself well in the world. You have to realize you got 2 ears, 2 eyes, you have very limited bandwidth. You have to listen to the market, right? You get a big ego and you think you're smarter than the market, that's when you get crushed.
Total lesson, yeah.
Bitcoin's imposing these principles on us. So it's just radical.
Yeah. I want to hit on something that actually you go first, Gigi, and then I'll hit.
I think that's exactly right. And I think the reason why Bitcoin can be seen as the capital T truth is because it makes its own reality. And there is no way to like undo or just argue with that reality. Like, as we just established before, it makes its own time, like the time chain is literally, with every single block, it's one tick of Bitcoin time. And yes, it's a little bit related to human time, but only for the difficulty adjustment. Like, timestamps do not matter in any other sense. That's also why some blocks can come before other blocks in human time, even though in Bitcoin, because they're chained together, it's obvious that this is block number whatever 15 and the next one is 16, and the timestamps, the human timestamps, are in reverse. And the way I see it, I think it's a beautiful visualization that you have your transactions, and they are in the digital realm. Pretty much everything is timeless, in the sense that you don't have a common time. It's an impossible problem to come up with a common time in a distributed global digital network, and Bitcoin managed to do that. It's impossible because of multiple things, like clocks are imprecise, you have lagging communication, you even have relativistic effects. So it's literally a virtually impossible task to come up with time, and Bitcoin solves it by just making up its own time, and it takes its time to do so. Like, on average, it waits 10 minutes for every single tick, and the transactions that are waiting in the mempool, they are still timeless. And once they are mined, once they're included in the block, they enter the definitive realm of Bitcoin, and they enter the definitive realm of fixed time. And that's also where entropy comes in. Like, it's the chaotic, timeless realm where the transactions wait, and that's the norm in the digital realm. They get included in a timely realm. And I really like, like Aleks, your company is called Ember, and that's the perfect metaphor of what's happening here. Like, with every single layer, it gets more truthful and more fixed, and it is building up the absolute truth, the capital T truth, layer by layer. And that's what Nakamoto consensus is. And if you haven't understood that, then you're just playing the wrong game.
It's funny. I'm going to sound like Dan Tapiero now. It's like, Bitcoin is the truth machine. But like the funny thing is, like, I mean, with all due respect to Dan, but you've got all these people, like that book that was written about blockchain being the truth machine. It's such it's really funny to hear, like, people like blockchainers and shitcoiners and all this sort of stuff think that they know what they're talking about by saying, somehow this new technology called the blockchain is what gives us, truth, and we can create provenance for, the diamonds that we're digging up out of the ground, or the fucking lettuce that we're growing in the thing. It's like it's almost as if they, I don't know, like they're fucking hallucinating. Like, they're kind of on the way there, but they've completely missed how, Bitcoin embodies this notion of objective truth. Like, I love this principle of, like, I just finished, a couple of weeks ago, I finished Atlas Shrugged again. And, Ayn Rand, really, like, I mean, in her book, like, beautiful. It's, I mean, it's the real life story, right? you know, she drives home, you know, points like A is A, you know, contradictions do not exist. When you find one, check your premises. Like this idea of like, you know, objective truth. And Bitcoin, you know, to me, and, you know, again, to you guys and everything, is like, it represents a return to an objective truth. And it doesn't matter what, you know, subjective, you know, interpretation that, you know, we have or that we decide to project on it. You know, Bitcoin is, you know, if I'm going to throw another meme out there. So it's like, and that's got nothing to do, you know, with, you know, new blockchains that have their own bullshit provenance or whatever the fuck that is, because they all miss the very nature of, you know, Bitcoin, you know, it's recipe, or like you kind of said earlier, Gigi, like the dance that it has that, you know, fundamentally makes everything else irrelevant along the way.
I think what most blockchain people truly miss is that there is no way to build a bridge between the digital and the physical world. Like there simply is no way. And again, it comes back to entropy and information pretty much. The digital realm is an informational realm. So you cannot put strawberries or diamonds or gold or what have you on the blockchain. It's impossible. You will always run into the Oracle problem. You will always need a trusted third party that will tell you, okay, here in this box, there are 10 strawberries. So I will put in this Excel spreadsheet that there are 10 strawberries. And there is no way around it. Like, it's an impossible problem. And it's obviously an impossible problem. Like, information has no sensors to the real world. And the only sensor, so to speak, quote unquote sensor, that an informational system can have is computation. It is because computation is informational. And that's exactly what proof of work is. You build a bridge to the real world, to the physical world, via the expense of energy. Like you have to, with everything that we know about our physical universe, there is no way to flip bits, to do computation without expending energy. And that's the only thing that works. That's a roundabout way of solving the Oracle problem. And that's why also you can only put, like, the only thing that works in such a system is having something that's purely informational and have that thing be of value. That's why every single stable coin is a scam. Everything single like supply chain on the blockchain is a scam. All of it doesn't work. Like, it doesn't work from first principles. And I think all the blockchain people they don't understand this issue at all.
They miss the whole energetic component, and it's just so funny that, like, it's the hubris of them calling that a truth machine while viewing Bitcoin as some sort of Ponzi scheme is just fucking hilarious to me. It's like, you know, the ultimate objective truth is staring them right in the face, but here they are trying to put strawberries on the fucking blockchain. It's like, it's so wild to me to see that.
Well, they will have to learn through pain.
Yeah. They will.
Yeah. I'm getting what are your thoughts here, but so I love to bring it back to why does money, you know, tend towards one. I like that you mentioned the bridge between digital and physical reality, because I think that bridge, it is Bitcoin, right? That is the only bridge between digital and physical reality. And I say that because money already was sort of the bridge. Like, the concept of money was the bridge between digital and physical reality, meaning that it represented a connection between the objective and the subjective, right? It was a connection between supply and value, right? Or supply and demand. And also the known and the unknown, right? The reason gold was selected as money is because it was the most knowable thing, right? And it was through its finitude, we would express the infinite variations of economic activity, right? So you needed this fixed frame of reference through which to perceive all the changes in the world, right? It's like a signal and noise thing. You needed the thing with the least noise in the channel to perceive the highest degree of signal. And Bitcoin has just perfected that, right? It's perfected it in proof of work. And that's why we're all struggling to describe it, right? It's just, it's the six blind guys describing the elephant. We're all, you know, it's a rope, it's a trunk, it's so mind blowing. We don't even have, I think, the vernacular to comprehend it fully. So that's one, like, I think that's a deep answer to that question, but you can only have one bridge between the digital and the physical, and it is money, right? So whatever is money that's your bridge. And another way to think about it is money is a claim on savings, right? So savings would be the collective time and energy, or the product of time and energy that's been infused into an economy, the capital that's been accumulated. And you would necessarily, anyone that's going to use money would want the largest pool, right? You want access to the largest pool of those savings. You want your monetary instrument to have the widest claim over the widest amount of capital and potential energy. So I think that points to it as well. It's like, clearly, you're always going to want the money with access to the most savings. Another way to think about that is, like, money's valued based on its liquidity, right? You want to know the most people will accept it reliably across time and space. So it just, these pools coalesce towards one.
They do, and that's sort of like describing the same thing on different levels. I always like, you know, as you sort of chunk it up, or, you know, maybe this is actually chunking down, like you move away from the cosmic element of it and down to like the more like the tangible expression. I always say, look, if you're going to work, you know, you're going to spend all this time, you know, all this effort, all this energy, and would you be stupid enough to hold, you know, to first be paid in salt and then hold all of your savings in salt, and then, you know, somehow get a bunch of water on that salt and all your savings are gone? Like, you're not that stupid, right? So, you know, you're gonna want to kind of hold that wealth or hold that money that you've, you know, worked for, that you've expended, you know, your effort, your energy, and all that sort of stuff, in something that is, you know, as good as possible in its representation of money. And this is Gresham's law in action, right? Is that we sort of push out, and like I call it economic Darwinism. Is that, you know, we naturally want to hold something that best represents, like, because I mean, you know, some people may not respect themselves, but even those people who might say they don't respect themselves actually, you know, put their best interests first. I don't give a fuck what anyone says. You know, we are fundamentally selfish creatures. So, you know, like, I actually don't believe altruism exists. I think altruism is another mechanism for us to, you know, serve our own needs first, despite what some, you know, might make us believe. But, you know, at the end of the day, like, you know, human action is this progressive motion forward with the intention of, you know, making, you know, life better for ourselves in some way, shape, or form, despite, you know, how those actions might manifest. You know, we might make our life fundamentally worse, but in the process of doing that, you know, we sort of are finding the best object. And that's exactly why we converged onto gold. Like, you know, we moved away from salt and seashells and rocks and all this other shit to gold, because it had these unique attributes. Like, you know, gold was the same in Australia as it was in Europe, as it was in America. You know, it's the only metal that is inert, so it looked the same everywhere. You know, it was hard to find. Like, it had all these beautiful attributes that were just like, you know, basically perfect for money when we lived in the purely physical realm. But, you know, now we've sort of transcended that, and, you know, unless we think that we're going to drop a nuke and blow all ourselves up, you know, that there's no argument really to go back to gold. Like, and in that scenario where we all blow ourselves up, we may as well go back to fucking lead and shooting each other, because, you know, I don't think gold's going to be very useful at that point, right? So it's so yeah.
So I think we're very focused on time here, but there's time and energy, I think, are kind of interchangeable as well, right? Like, we're storing our time or our energy in this medium that is money. And something, I actually got this from my interviews with Saylor, is he describes money as being the ultimate form of energy, right? That it is a claim on all other forms of energy, right? You can use monetary energy to acquire chemical energy, food energy, kinetic energy, heat, whatever. It's like a meta energy. And that, to me, also points to why money would be singular, right? again, you want the most meta of meta energies, right? That's just Darwinian self-preservation. If you care about breathing and eating and having shelter and reproducing, you're going to choose the most meta energy you can get your hands on. Another way to say it, I think, is the most theft-proof money, right? The money most resistant to confiscation, inflation, unexpected supply changes, deauthorization. Like, it's not just that gold was a historic preference, like some anomaly. It was the end result of an entire history of economic Darwinism, right? People that didn't hold their value in gold were naturally selected out of existence. Yeah. So I think, I don't know, man, that's a lot of ways to look at it. And I love this quote from Jordan Peterson, actually. He says, all true maps must align. Right. So everything we're using to throw and describe Bitcoin is like some little map of what it is. And it's this deep fundamental truth that's, I guess beyond our description right now in a lot of ways. And I consider another quote that I love is the map is not the territory. So I think all of our perceptions about Bitcoin are just maps, and Bitcoin is the territory, right? Bitcoin is the thing that's closest to the territory of reality, which is thermodynamics. And it's fucking superordinate to politics. And that's where you would blow out every altcoin. Every altcoin is vulnerable to politics except Bitcoin.
Yeah.
That's
and
right.
I think that's another thing that most altcoiners, shitcoiners, blockchainers, call them as you wish, miss completely. Like, the whole idea of the Bitcoin system is to build something that they can't stop, whatever they are, nation states, pick your enemy. The only reason why Bitcoin exists and is as complicated as it is, even though you could also argue it's really simple. It's another of those contradictions. But the only reason for this intricate dance that Bitcoin performs is that it can't be shut off, is that it can't be stopped. So if you're playing a game, if you're building something that can be stopped, what are you even doing? Like, that's not why we're here. We're only here because everything else can be subverted by the state or other powerful entities. And the whole idea of Bitcoin is that it can't. And everyone who misses that is just playing the wrong game. And I think...
Sorry, go on, Gigi. No, you go finish.
And I really like the Bitcoin is the territory and everything else is just a map way of thinking about it, because I think that's exactly right. And in one of the first articles I wrote, I had exactly also the picture of the blind monks examining the elephant. And I think that's still what's going to happen pretty much for all eternity, because I think it's just too complicated to make sense of it completely. But you can understand aspects of it very well, I think. And to loop back once more, why I believe that it is definitely a winner takes all scenario. You can view it, as we said, as time and stored time. And that is obviously, like, you can only store your time in one thing. I think just like you can only concentrate on one thing at a time. But it can also be understood as a network. And Rob, you alluded to that before. Like, if you think about economic calculations, it is like the market is like a big brain. Why would you have different kind of communication mechanisms inside your brain? Like, it's way more efficient to only have one. You can also think of money as a sort of language, and it's the same idea. Like, we are all speaking English here, and everyone online pretty much is speaking English. Doesn't matter where I come from. That doesn't necessarily mean that everything, like every other language, goes extinct. It just means that the most efficient protocols and networks and languages win out in the end, and everything converges to that. And you can view Bitcoin through all these lenses, and all these lenses will show you that there is like a dominance hierarchy forming, to use another Jordan Peterson term, and the thing that is on top in terms of protocols and networks and languages just takes it all. And it's especially true for money, because money is all of those things.
Yeah, I'm just going to throw a couple of things in there. So, this notion of the territory and the maps, and like, I mean, I think all existence for human beings is like that. You know, we've sort of got these five senses, and some might argue we've got some sort of sixth intuitive sense. And really, what we do is we sort of have these frameworks in our mind through which we perceive and interact with reality. So we are actually always fundamentally functioning through our own lens, which is a map in and of itself of the real territory. And that's kind of like, you know, Bitcoin's, you know, our ability to comprehend and understand Bitcoin is similar in that sense. But, you know, when we start to see, you know, people like, you know, myself, yourself, Gigi, Robert, you know, Michael Saylor, and, you know, this whole subjective, you know, pathway to you know, drawing our own maps, which all seem to, like Rob said earlier, Jordan Peterson's quote, just seem to overlap so nicely. Saying different things but meaning the same thing. It's a really interesting validation, in particular for something like Bitcoin. I want to throw two more things in there. So one, the idea of us converging again onto money, and you know, the economic Darwinism piece. So, you know, Gigi, you mentioned before they'll come to it through pain. So I think you're referring probably to that article that I wrote recently, the Bitcoin and lockdown. So it's like that adoption curve. Like, you know, I'm not so much interested in the price, because, you know, we sort of start at 0 and we end up at, you know, infinity divided by 21 million. But like, sort of, what does that look like, and what's the driver there? And the driver is like this movement to an objective reality. And at some point, you're going to be moved into it. You know, like, so one of the quotes in there, I think I remember, is, you know, necessity is not only the mother of invention, but it's like the grandmother of all change. So everyone's going to have to fucking come along, whether they like it or not. But, you know, the question is, you know, do you sort of get ahead of the curve, or do you fight reality for as long as possible? Like, you know, like, how long do you want to play the Icarus game for? You know, or how long do you want to fucking, you know, or do you want to get ahead of this this shift? And then and to tie that off with the last little point here is this you know, this notion that, you know, Bitcoin itself, like, transcends all of the way we kind of almost understand the world today through, you know, institutions and organizations of centrally planned control or whatever. So it's like when you mentioned earlier about you know, the shitcoiners, that they want to have control of this thing. You know what I mean? They want to be able to turn it on and off. You know, and whether that's shitcoiners, whether that's fintech people, whether that's, you know, central bankers, whether that's governments, and, you know, all this sort of stuff, they all sort of operating in the same paradigm, which is, you know, I am God in some sense, and I should be able to turn off this thing. I should be able to turn reality on and off at a fucking switch, and that just doesn't work. And this is sometimes, you know, what drives me mental. I know Rob wrote that, like, you know, huge piece to Dalio, and I wrote like a little one called Correcting Dalio as well. It's like, you know, you hear these people, like, you know, the so-called successful hedge fund managers and things like that seem to just be completely, they talk about paradigm shifts, but they're completely encapsulated within that paradigm shift, and they just can't seem to imagine you know, a movement towards, you know, a natural order that transcends this idea that, you know, we can, in our little fucking bubble, can somehow isolate a thing and turn it on and off. And this, you know, ties back nicely with the conversation you had recently, Rob, with the dude on Stefan Livero's podcast. Is like, you know, this isn't, I mean, you know, the argument of, are we going into a more sovereign individual like type future is almost a moot point, because, you know, we can't subsist by continually denying reality. It's, you know, it's not going to happen. It's, you know, it's like the fool that jumps off the edge of the cliff and thinks in the first 2 seconds that he's defeated gravity because he's moving up. You know, when you sort of zoom out a little bit on a longer time frame, like, you know, people in the, you know, in the coming centuries are going to look back on us and think, how did these idiots ever think that they could, you know, operate by printing money out of thin air and, you know,
Yeah.
running
I think
large scale governance and all this crap?
I think Michael Saylor mentioned pretty much the same points in his interview with Robert. And he mentioned the Chinese billionaire who, while taking a selfie, fell off the cliff and gravity did him in. Like once you try to, yeah, it's a really ridiculous story. But the point is that you can't find nature. And I think Bitcoin is best understood as nature. And Seyfedin wrote about that. And the Friar Haas, Satoshi be with him, he makes this point all the time. Bitcoin is nature. And I think Seyfedin wrote even in the Bitcoin standard that Bitcoin is best understood as like a force of nature, like the rising sun and the setting sun and the moon and the stars. And it's literally this global clock that just won't stop ticking, and you can use it as you wish. And I think the only way forward will be symbiosis. If you don't find a way to symbiotically coexist with the Bitcoin organism, you will suffer a lot in the coming years and decades. And I also think that like I'm fascinated by how quickly Michael Saylor, the GigaChat, also Satoshi bless him, how quickly he came up to speed with everything. And I really like how he sees Bitcoin as this closed system, like this closed thermodynamic system. And I think that's really important to understand, that it is a system that does not leak because it makes its own reality, so to speak. Like it bootstrapped itself from nothing. And it has been working in the same fashion since day one. Like nothing changed in Bitcoin pretty much. I mean, of course, there were some improvements and we had SegWit and so on and so forth. But in the grand scheme of things, nothing really changed. And I also think that it's really, really important to realize what's going on there in terms of how Bitcoin, again, relates to entropy and time. Because what most people don't understand still is that in the digital realm, there are no tokens. We solved this coordination problem of who gave what to whom and when by using tokens in the physical realm. Like we have gold nuggets and gold coins and so on. Gold coins and just any bearer asset, it doesn't need a timestamp. It doesn't need time. You either have the gold coin or you don't have it. And when it was transacted, doesn't matter. Once you move to ledgers, time enters the picture. And you need to have an absolute ordering, and you need to have an absolute time to make sense of this ledger. A ledger can only be truthful if you have a truthful source of time. Yeah. And so in summary, like to put it very bluntly, tokens are timeless and ledgers are not. And Bitcoin is the only, like it managed to solve this problem by combining the best of two worlds, so to speak. And it is now almost like a timeless ledger that everyone can use because it makes up its own time. It's really hard to articulate how profound this is, because you can use it as you would use a physical token, but it isn't. And it only works because it is this closed system that makes up its own rules and that makes its own reality. And it roots like the bridge between the Bitcoin reality and our own reality with the laws of the universe that we have is rooted in energy. And I think there is no more truthful bridge. It's rooted in energy and time, and like it's rooted in the first principles of physics that we know. And that's also why I think there's just no stopping this thing, because it just works on first principles and nothing else. Like it works on first principles, physics, and human greed, and those things won't change as far as I'm concerned.
I can just I can imagine people listening to this now, watching, just be like mind blowing. It's Rob, do you have anything you want to add to that, or do you want me to throw some stuff? This is fucking sick. Talk about a cosmic call. Like this is like the ultimate.
On the topic of perception, right? Each of us being we each bring our own lens to reality, or our own a priori assumptions, right? Even if we don't cognitively understand them, the aperture through which we look at the world is stained with our own experience, our own genetics, our own everything, right? And that's what that's what the market is. That's what it's intended to overcome, is to synthesize all of our perspectives together and clear away the bias, right? So that we're left with truth, essentially. And other Bitcoiners, like the caliber of who people are intellectually, that is what makes me more bullish than anything else, right? As a student of the market, to sit back and say, all right, I think one thing, I see one thing, but the recognition that I am limited and I only have, this scope on the world. What do other scopes on the world say? And the fact that, to your point earlier, Svetski, that they're all zeroing in on this, describing it slightly different. I mean, it's just such a powerful gravity well, right? Not only financially, intellectually, philosophically, morally, which makes me think, and maybe we can talk about more of this later, but alchemy talked for a long time about this thing, the philosopher's stone that would cure tyranny. But maybe we can talk about that later. I think too, I love the analogy to Bitcoin being a North Star, right? I actually mentioned this in the Masters and Slaves piece, where when slaves were escaping Annabellum South, trying to flee to the free states of the North, they needed guides. They needed waypoints to know that they were moving north. So they would look at the migration patterns of birds. They would notice that moss grew on the north side of trees, and they would use these different clues basically to make sure they're always orienting themselves north. But the one that was most important was the North Star, right? It was something hung high in the heavens that every slave master would have muted or extinguished if they could have had they had the power to do so, but they couldn't do it, right? And this became like the ultimate guiding light to liberty for slaves. And I think that Bitcoin is sort of similar, right? It's this 21 million that is beyond the reach of man. Like that's what's saving us from ourselves. It's like we can no longer manipulate the most important tool in the world against ourselves, right? Against our fellow. It's been put beyond our reach. Satoshi did us the greatest gift ever, to just take it and set it beyond our reach once and for all, and it just completely reorients us.
I love that notion of like saving us from ourselves and like just putting it beyond our reach. That's such a powerful notion.
And back to the topic of truth, right? The closest models of truth we have in our current understanding of the world are math, thermodynamics, and Darwinian self-preservation, right? And again, Bitcoin has just fused all of these into one thing, right? It is math. It's adhering to the laws of thermodynamics through proof of work. And it bootstraps itself through recognition of our Darwinian self-preservation, right? It incentivizes us to interact with it. And it's just fucking mind-blowing. And then the last thing, I had a note on this, but we're talking about Bitcoin being time and truth and all these things. Like, just look at what's going on in the world today. We have negative interest rates. Negative interest rates. What are negative interest rates? That interest rate is the cost of time, the price of time, right? The price of money. So we have central planners, legislators saying that time has a negative value now. Like that's the peak foolishness we're in.
Yeah, we're literally, like, it's just so funny how at the period of time when we're literally living through the greatest of lies, we sort of have the greatest of truth that emerged at the same time. And I spoke about this in the article that I did recently, like America is dead, long live Bitcoin. Is this idea that whilst like I kind of say that the American dream died, and I kind of go through all these points, but at the end of it I finished like the concluding section was like a new hope, and I talk about how the American dream cannot die, because that same dream that dream was just it's the same one that was embodied by the people of the Renaissance before, by the philosophers in the ancient times. Like it's that same thread of like sovereignty and objective truth that has sort of been threaded in it. And today it lives on in Bitcoiners. And it's funny how like the more deranged society gets, somehow there's this universal balancing mechanism. Is like, you know, we've not seen like fucking lies. I mean, at least not in my lifetime. And like, I mean, unless we sort of study history, we might have seen like the extent of lies. But I mean, like, I can't even imagine them having been propagated in the way they are today. Like, I mean, you know, you post something that is factual on a social network and it just gets deleted the next day. Like, it's wild to see how deranged the world is coming. But you have this sort of emergent, you know, thing. I don't even know how to call Bitcoin anymore. It's like, you know, that has kind of come up, and, you know, represents like a bastion of truth, in a sea of lies. And coming back to that North Star thing, it's like, you know, when you're talking about how, you know, the slaves sort of running up north and they found the moss on the trees and like little different signals. It's like almost Bitcoiners are like the moss on the trees and stuff like that, you know, like we're those sort of like little signals. But, you know, the North Star is always the North Star. And that's the one thing that, you know, no amount of slave trader or tyrant or anything, they can't fucking change that no matter what they do.
Right.
You know, they can peel the moss off the trees, you know, they can come after us as individuals, but they can't touch Bitcoin, no matter what the fuck they think how powerful they think they are. And that to me is like, whilst it's, you know, again, I said this before the call, like I think this decade is going to be a rough decade, not only for average people, but also for Bitcoiners as well, because, you know, I have a feeling that at some point, you know, as particularly, you know, well-known Bitcoiners, like a lot of us who put our face out there, like, you know, Gigi is going to be relatively immune.
Let's see about that.
But I mean, some of us, you know, are really sort of putting ourselves out there, and it's like, you know, people are going to turn and look at us and say, you know, you got lucky with Bitcoin. Maybe you should spread some of that wealth around. So I don't know. It's going to be, whilst, you know, that is there, like it's almost that. What's that saying? Is I think I've heard Tony Robbins say it's this idea of, you know, we are never faced with a problem in life that we do not have the tools or capacity to kind of withstand. Now I'm butchering and, you know, paraphrasing what he says, but it's this idea that, and you see it permeates through everything, whether it's, you know, Star Wars and like, you know, I recently finished, like, if anyone hasn't read Hyperion yet, holy fucking shit. Like, yeah, that by far is the most powerful sci-fi thing that I've ever fucking experienced. But like all of these stories, all of the narratives that we've sort of created, every tyranny that we've seen happen throughout history, every struggle has always had, you know, counterbalancing force. Like it's, you know, we've all, for every dark, there's always been some light. You know, there's always, like, even if it was just a candle, you know, and it always came at the right time, because there is no, you know, there is no all-consuming darkness. There is no, like, you know, there is no singular, you know, evil. You know, we'll always have the North and South Pole, and Bitcoin has kind of, you know, emerged just in the nick of time, and that kind of, it's such a humbling realization to me.
I like the way I think about it is the Taoists obviously figured that out a long time ago. The yin yang symbol, where you have like the white spot in, no matter how dark it gets, there's always a little white spot in it. And the way I see Bitcoin is as exactly this white spot. The thing that keeps me up at night currently is this spot is gonna grow for quite a while. And what I'm thinking about on my bad days is what is the dark spot gonna be like in the white spot that is Bitcoin, you know, like once it becomes the white half, what are we overlooking? I think currently we're not overlooking much, but I think, you know, Bitcoin definitely, for example, is no utopia. You mentioned, I think, and I think it's exactly right. People will be so angry at Bitcoiners because they were also lucky, you know, not realizing the blood that is streaming out of your eyes and ears and every other hole in your body once you have been through a long bear market and other things, you know. So they don't know that it's that Satoshis don't come easy. That's what I'm gonna say. And the thing is that Bitcoiners will definitely spread their wealth, but they only will do so voluntarily. Like there is no other way to get sats from a Bitcoiner. He has to give them willingly. And I think this is such a profound thing that nobody has come to grips with yet. Definitely not politicians, definitely not central bankers, definitely not society at large. I think even many Bitcoiners, even like you have to be quite deep down the rabbit hole already and very self-sovereign to understand that if you're doing things properly, if you have a proper setup, there is just no way that anyone can take your sats from you. You have to give them away voluntarily. And I think this will be such a profound change in society that we can't even imagine it yet. Like we're only in the very, very, very beginnings. Like Brady always likes to say, we're at the dawn of the Bitcoin Renaissance. And I truly believe that. That's why I also have this background on currently. And I think what we are seeing currently is insanely motivated people, like insanely exceptional people starting companies, building towards this bright orange future. Like every waking hour, every single brain cycle is used for Bitcoin, is used to build this better future. And I think most people are completely underestimating that. And just everything that's going to change on a societal and economic level, we can't even dream up the consequences yet. I think things are going to be so wild in the next decade or two that it's hard to believe, and it will all be because of Bitcoin.
Fuck, I'm so pumped right now. It's Rob, do you have anything to add to that? Like I'm like teeming with energy right now.
A couple of things. So we sort of hit this point, but just to put a button on it, the Bitcoin is the first man-made substance that's totally untouchable by man, right? We created something transcendent to ourselves, and that's why it's so flabbergasting, I guess. And I think we're going to see this breakout soon too, because we know now that governments are at the end of their rope, especially financially, and that historically the next thing that happens are forced wealth redistributions, debt jubilees, things of this nature. And that, I think, will be maybe the tipping point for Bitcoin, right? It's people are going to wise up to the truth very quickly that there is only one asset that is truly untouchable, that is not one private property right in the world, that is not a government IOU, and that is Bitcoin. So I see, billionaires, high net worth individuals, anyone trying to protect themselves from forced wealth redistribution, seeking refuge in Bitcoin, probably in the next decade. But I do, and you hit on this earlier, I can't remember the exact quote, but it's something to the effect that no great thing comes into the world without casting a long shadow or creating a curse. And I wonder too what Bitcoin's will be. I wonder what Bitcoin's negative aspect will be. And who knows, but it's another way to think about that is just the thing that's the most resistant to involuntary exchange becomes adopted as the voluntary medium of exchange, right? People want this guarantee of integrity and wealth, and nothing offers a higher experience.
I think the little thing you said about like it being a voluntary thing. So this has been the dream of the libertarians and the Austrian economists and the founding fathers of America and all that sort of stuff. From the beginning is how do we build a society that is based on principles of like voluntary opt-in, or because that like I think down to its like root nature is the idea of liberty, and the idea of freedom is about, you know, voluntary actions. Like, and you can voluntarily choose to be a part of something or not, you know, and this is where, you know, people who sort of advocate democracy and things like that, is that this is what they get wrong, is that they miss the voluntary nature of it. Is that, you know, just because you know, a majority voted, now, you know, those who didn't no longer have the voluntary opportunity or the voluntary choice to opt out, right? So this is why none of these large scale you know, government type or you know, democratically elected you know, governing bodies ever work. Like the only mechanism for human beings to actually vote for in real time, and I did a video on this, is like the ultimate vote is economic, not democratic in nature. Because when you vote economically, you're actually voting with your own resources voluntarily. Like, you know, when you buy you know, steak instead of broccoli, you're voting for steak. You know, when you buy you know, when you buy a, you know, this property over another, you're voting for that. So we all are voting on an economic level every single day. That's so much more efficient, because, you know, it is the vote of the individual, but through this you know, objective substrate called money, which, you know, Bitcoin best embodies, and in some ways transcends almost, is, you know, we're able to all, you know, voluntarily and subjectively coexist, but to do it in groups, and then to find, you know, ways to, you know, align our different values and things like that. But I kind of want to go to a topic here about, like you mentioned before, Rob, about curing tyranny, and I'm writing, like, my piece for the New Bitcoin Times is going to be called utopias are the pathway to dystopias. And in my mind, like, you know, I'm pretty, you know, I don't want to say tied to, but I strongly believe that life itself is a messy process, because it's free. You know, when we look at you know, like the perfection in life comes from its imperfection. It comes from its irregularities. Like, and you know, what we seem to try and do in particularly in modern society is we try and sterilize or sanitize the actual very life out of society by trying to, you know, remove any freedom and optimize for like complete safety, for example. And we basically, we suffocate the life out of, and when I say we, I mean, you know, society at large, government, central banks, and all this sort of stuff, is like they try and control the uncontrollable. And the beauty of life is that, you know, unless it's allowed to sort of to grow and to you know, to be an uncontrollable thing, you know, it can't really exist. Now, you know, life has to still have some boundaries, you know, and those boundaries, like, you know, we have in terms of, you know, time, entropy, you know, the speed of light, you know, you have these constants. You know, now we can sort of add Bitcoin into that realm of these, you know, universal constants that, you know, are out of the reach of any force to change. And, you know, within those constants, within those constraints, you know, life can prosper. But as soon as we try and control life itself, you know, we find that we take it out, and that's, you know, that's tyranny. And for me, you know, what I see is, you know, I wrote libertarian, you know, libertarianism is not about utopia, you know, is libertarians believe in freedom. Now, freedom can fundamentally be messy. You know, we live within the reality of scarce resources and uncertain time, and, you know, scarce time. Like, we are like, and when you wrap that in this, you know, subjective nature of individuality, we're going to get into arguments. You know, we're going to beat each other over the head. You know, that violence will always exist. But when we skew the, and I'm going to sprinkle a little bit of sovereign individual in here, is like when we skew the incentives to, you know, to act violently, by lowering the cost of defense and increasing the cost of attack, we kind of, we start to trend towards a society where, where voluntary exchange is, more rewarding than, violent theft, which is kind of where we live today. But again, this, I'm still kind of working through this. So again, I'm throwing this out there, but I think this idea that we can somehow, bring about a utopia because someone said so. We can remove all conflict. We can have peace on earth because we can, if only we gave the intelligentsia or the, academics enough power to figure out everything. In my mind, that arrogance, that hubris, that ignorance to how natural life functions, which is this messy process of finding its way, is the path to basically creating a 1984. Like I always say, if you want peace and no violence, go live in North Korea, because they don't have any, there's nothing going on there. Like no one's fighting on the streets. So coming back to my original thing is, is this a cure to tyranny, or is this a counterbalance? Is Bitcoin a cure to tyranny? Is it a counterbalance to tyranny? What are the ugly parts of a future that is more hyper Bitcoinized? Or do because we've sort of solved, or we've adjusted these incentives to voluntary cooperation, does the the externality of that solution to local entropy, does that sort of push beyond then our world? So a bunch of things there. Whoever wants to pick up on any of those threads, go hard.
I have a very quick answer in terms of what are the negative side effects of hyper-Bitcoinization. I don't know. I have no idea.
Okay.
I'm sure there will be some, but I have no idea. So I'd be interested in hearing Rob unpack all this.
I'm getting a little feedback from your microphone, so that's good.
I'm going to mute myself and Rob, let you go, right?
So I know this is a topic that Gigi's been interested in as well. We're both, I would say at this point, I'm a disciple of Jordan Peterson. I've listened to all of his stuff twice, 2.5 times. I read his book, Maps of Meaning, which is brutally hard. It's 500 pages of some of the most dense literature I've ever read, but very rewarding. And a lot of his thinking on the concept of alchemy comes from Carl Jung. So I don't know a lot about it, but from what I've studied in his writing, the aim of the alchemist was to create the lapis philosophorum, which is the philosopher's stone. And it was said to be the incorruptible substance that would serve as an antidote to tyranny. And the other thing about alchemy is that it was a fork off of the church. The church basically operated on the premise that Jesus was the final redeemer. All you needed to do were follow the rules of the church and you had a utopia, right? But there was a heretical group of people that said, fuck that. We can go into the world, the laboratory of nature, experiment, figure things out, and we can create a better world. The methodologies that alchemy established became precursors to the scientific method. So we can think of alchemy as proto-science, right? The alchemical methodologies evolved to be into the scientific method. And this stayed with us for a long time. Isaac Newton was an alchemist, right? This was even just a couple of 100 years ago. So, and I find it interesting now that we have at the pinnacle of science, right? At the pinnacle of computer science, Bitcoin exists. And it is the first incorruptible substance we've ever had, right? As we've described, the first untouchable thing, right? 21 million. It's a number that can't be corrupted, changed. There's no political attack vector whatsoever. And the promise of Bitcoin, right? The reason we're all so excited about it is that the potential is to be this final antidote to tyranny, right? This return to a purely voluntarism-based society. And the other thing about it that's interesting is that the alchemists believe that in pursuing and interacting with the philosopher's stone, that it would actually change you as well. And everyone I think that's in Bitcoin can describe the changes they've had in their lives. Something about studying this thing very deeply. I'm not saying you just go buy Bitcoin and your moral compass shifts, but by studying it and interacting with it deeply, most everyone that I've interacted with reports a general lowering of their time preference, right? Becoming more family-oriented, health-oriented, et cetera, et cetera. And the Philosopher's Stone 2 was purported to be a union of opposites. And like how many things we describe today where Bitcoin lives at this nexus of paradox, of opposites connecting and intersecting, right? We've talked about capitalism and communism, right? And I put this in my most recent piece, but Bitcoin is a public utility that facilitates the trade flows of private property, right? You're merging this communistic utopia with capitalistic pragmatism, right? And you get Bitcoin kind of thing. It's a merger of science and religion, right? We have this scientific invention rooted in computer and economic science, but has religious like fervor surrounding it. It's the fusion of the known and the unknown, right? We're talking about the perfectly knowable 21 million, as certain as the thermodynamic arrow of time, but it's rooted in the deepest unknown in the world, right? The mining proof of work process is that ever receding horizon. The harder you pursue it, the more complicated it becomes, right? So in that sense, it's kind of like the merger of order and chaos, which are the two fundamental domains of reality, as Peterson describes. Even as you said earlier, you're talking about tokens being timeless and ledgers being temporal, and it's sort of combined both. It's like every way you look at this thing, it's paradoxical in nature, and it seems like we're back to the gravity well where it's uniting opposites. And that's where the black hole is a great analogy, right? It's like beyond that event horizon is where physics breaks down. And it's as if everything we throw at this thing to try and describe it, it just hits this event horizon. And it's just, blackness. And it's beautiful, it's terrifying, it's worthy of respect. And I guess in the highest sense, it's a fusion of freedom and authoritarianism, right? Because we're all bending the knee to Bitcoin. We're all bending the knee that no one can stop, no one can do anything about. But in doing so, it's maximizing human cooperation. So I don't know if Bitcoin is the philosopher's stone, but I think it's a hell of an interesting rabbit hole to go down.
It's I just wrote a note here. It's I think we're all achieving. Everyone can quote this if they want. Enlightenment through Bitcoin. It's like, dude, on so many levels. Like because we're talking there like. The essence of Western philosophy, we're talking the essence of religion, we're talking the essence of Eastern philosophy, we're talking the essence of alchemy, like, and all of these things were these like potential pathways to enlightenment. And here we are, like, again, what I talked about earlier is this idea of like, the American dream lives on through the Bitcoiners. Is like the principles are there. And, the idea of Bitcoin is technically timeless. Like, it's been with us since we were conscious enough to understand the idea of the sovereign individual. And yeah, it's just become this. I think the black hole analogy is so powerful because like everything sort of combined, like duality sort of collapses inside the in the black hole. So we do have that singularity, that point of unity, and Bitcoin really represents that. And then as we sort of all project on it, and as we sort of move out of it, then we start to move into this realm of reality that within the reality that we live in, which is one of duality, of good and evil, of right and wrong, of all this, like the subjective reality. that we are all sort of a part of. So I guess, Gigi, did you want to sort of throw something in there before I sort of ramble on something else?
Yeah, I think the black hole metaphor and the gravity metaphor is really apt and really accurate. And I wrote a piece actually called Bitcoin's Gravity. Aleks, can you mute yourself for a second, please? The echo is really bad. And I think it's not only a black hole in terms of understanding, but also economically. I think it's obvious that Bitcoin will just swallow all kinds of value as it goes along and as it grows. And it will keep growing for quite a while. Like, we are still before the early adopter phase. We're still, like, the global penetration of Bitcoin is so insanely small, it's really hard to believe. So it hasn't even started yet. And in this piece about Bitcoin's gravity, I describe how I see Bitcoin evolve in terms of its constituents as well, because I think Bitcoin, as it is currently, is made up of ideas, people, code, and nodes, and all of those parts of Bitcoin are currently evolving. And as Rob said as well, like, every Bitcoiner kind of knows this and has his own story, how Bitcoin changes you. And so Bitcoin definitely changes you. It also changes the nodes it is running on. We see this in the mining industry. We see this in the node industry. It also changes the software, like the code that makes it work. And it also changes its own ideas and our ideas. Like, Bitcoin, in a sense, is a fixed set of ideas, but it's also expanding on higher layers. Like, what's happening on a Lightning network, for example, is only possible because of Bitcoin. And some of the ideas are very different than the main ideas embedded in the Bitcoin base layer. And I think the gravity will just grow and grow and grow. And we see that now with, like, corporations even moving to a Bitcoin standard. Like, the last couple of years, the last 10 years or so, if you were on a personal Bitcoin standard, you were insanely crazy. In the last 2 or 3 years, maybe not so crazy anymore, but still kind of extremely crazy. And now we see corporations moving to a Bitcoin standard. And we see also, I think, a circular economy forming on the side. I think it's still way too early, but still it's happening. Like, there are people that are so convinced and quote unquote religious about it. They will only take Bitcoin and they will only work for Bitcoin, and they will, like, they're so disgusted by fiat and what it stands for that they just won't hold it unless it's absolutely necessary. And I think we will see all of that grow and evolve, and Bitcoin's gravity will only increase. And as we all know, the end result will be a black hole. Like, it will be a singularity. And I think what's beautiful about Bitcoin, it started at 0, and when all is said and done, it will be at 0 again, because if there is no other measure left to measure it against, the price of Bitcoin will eventually be 0 again. If you have no other currencies to compare it to, that's how do you measure a Bitcoin? You can only measure it in stakes. So we go from 0 to 0, and that's how I see it.
Like the alpha omega.
Exactly.
So coming back to then that question about tyranny. So I guess Rob, you mentioned earlier, it's like, the philosopher's stone is the cure to tyranny. Do you think we eradicate tyranny, or do you think it it morphs into something else? Do you think the solution to the local entropy problem that we have on Earth and in the world that we sort of live in, because again, if we're going to be consistent with our thought here, is that if we solve entropy in one place, there needs to be an externality elsewhere. So at the moment, central banks are solving solving entropy for themselves at the expense of all of us. But we sort of solve it through Bitcoin for all of us. Like, where does that externality flow? And does the notion of tyranny, or call it evil or stuff like that, does that sort of evolve into something else? Have you given that any thought, or is that sort of where are you at with that?
So I would say that tyranny historically has been an effective strategy, right? You can basically employ a specialization of violence in an energy efficient way, and you can harvest value from whoever will conform, right? And that is critically dependent on assets being confiscatable, people being passive, docile, et cetera, et cetera. So Bitcoin definitely shifts us into a different kind of society where things, the economics of violence are just dramatically reduced, which, you know, that is at the heart of the sovereign individual thesis. But I think in terms of tyranny itself, what happens to the entropy, right? If we're on a Bitcoin standard, I think we have to keep in mind that entropy is not a purely negative thing, right? We need, as we described earlier, the free market. We need entropy. It's the balance between order and chaos, right? We need the structure, and this is at a biological level, and this is at a societal level. You need structures that can be carried forward across time, right? These are the lessons you've learned, you've accumulated through adaptation across time. You can carry those structures forward such that should the organism or the society encounter a similar problem again, it has the appropriate response encoded inside of it. But you can't have too much order. It can't be too much order, because that is tyranny, right? That's in the mythological sense, that is the dead king, I think they called it, where the society is unbending and rigid, so it doesn't adapt at all, right? There's no room left for it to learn. So you need this balance between order, but also a certain flexibility to entropy, right? So you could think of it, back to the map and territory example, as if all of these structures we create are maps, right? It's trying to map us forward through space and time, but the map is never the territory, and the territory is always shifting, right? Entropy is always increasing in the universe. Things are becoming different all the time. So the map needs to be able to adapt to new territory, but it also needs to preserve some of its past integrity and structure. So I think the entropy on a Bitcoin standard gets redirected into the free market paradigm, right? Because the market itself feeds on entropy, right? It's all individual entrepreneurs in their own specific domain of expertise, in their own spatiotemporal domain, right? What can they see, touch, who do they interact with? Constantly using the logos, their wits, their reason to convert the unknown into the known, right? So it's a decentralized, distributed system for harnessing entropy and converting it into good and useful order. So I think that's what happens. I kind of see it as, if you consider the whole world as a sphere, which it is a sphere, and you have this tiny, well, not so tiny, fairly large sphere attached to it as the central bank, that central bank is internalizing certainty or neg entropy and pushing out entropy into the rest of the world. So it's as if that little sphere is air conditioned, right? And the rest of the world's getting heated up. And again, that's inflation, social unrest, warfare. Whereas if we pluck that son of a gun off there, then all of a sudden everyone is able to engage this cooling effect of converting entropy into good and useful order. So it restores like a balance to the world. I don't think you get rid of tyranny. There's always going to be people that tyrannize, but the economics of tyranny are dramatically reduced.
Yeah, I think, you know, it's funny. As I was just writing my notes then, you just literally said it, is this idea of the deranged, you know, structure of entropy and or chaos and order at the moment that we're seeing in the world. It's almost like, you know, that meme of the dude who pumped his biceps, you know, so big, like that Brazilian so-called bodybuilder. So it's like that's almost what the world we live in at the moment is. Like, we've got this like fucking fucked up, out of order, like, you know, weird, monstrous shape of an economy in a world, because it's being, you know, this entropy engine is being localized, you know, within a few institutions around the world, you know, and the largest of which is obviously the Federal Reserve. Whereas, you know, moving into a Bitcoin world, like it's almost like, you know, when you were talking about it, like from a biological perspective earlier, it's like, you know, autophagy, like the idea of, you know, your body eating up its own cells, like when you're fasting, like so like life is a process of creative destruction, if we're going to throw another word out there, is and Bitcoin sort of enables the better spread of or the more fair and almost like me and Guy Swan were actually talking about this the other day. He said, he was asking me the question of, would have technology accelerated in the way we have seen it accelerate today? And I was like, probably not. Like if we didn't print money, we would have built things. Like innovation is traditionally driven by need. Whereas in today's society, innovation is no longer driven by need, it's driven by excess capital. So we're building shit that we don't need. Like we don't need another variation of fucking Instagram. Like, we need to solve other problems, like, people fucking dying of starvation and, all these other things. But we're not doing those because there's this complete misallocation of capital and resources and everything's like all fucking confused. And like, again, that analogy of that bodybuilder with big biceps and no fucking legs and nothing else is like, we're a deformed society at the moment because we haven't allowed it to organically regulate. And fundamentally, that's because we've been lacking this source of truth. So I might tie this little section up with, I think, just the profound notion of, and again, I keep quoting Tony Robbins because I think, he's another one of those, for me, I think really powerful individuals, is he talks about this idea of as we progress in life, it's our mission is not to remove problems, it's to have a better quality of problems. And, I think this abhorrent notion in the world that we can somehow remove everyone's problems or remove conflict is, again, the sanitation of life itself. Like you remove, because life, like, if we look at the old guy, Norman Vincent Peale, like the original guy who was about, positive thinking, he popularized this idea of, if you don't have any problems, problems are a sign of life. And if you don't have any problems, you better get on your knees and pray for some, because the only people that don't have any problems are the ones in the cemetery, right? So it's like, I don't think we'll ever transcend problems, but what we'll do is we'll on a Bitcoin standard or in a world that rewards voluntary participation, voluntary exchange, and respects private property, not just because we should, but because the cost of defense has been lowered and the cost of attack has been increased. We have a world where we can work on a better quality of problem instead of the stupidity that we're doing today, which is, let's build another fucking prop trading desk. Let's start another hedge fund. Let's do another, pointless fucking software application that can help you get a little bit of alpha. Let's do more DeFi. Like all of that crap kind of goes away because, like, all of the brains of the world at the moment, and this is why we've seen such a growth in, fundamentally software and banking, is, these resources have been skewed. And we're building a deranged fucking world that, optimizes for clicks, for likes, and for yield, chasing fucking yield, and for consumption, right. for things we don't need, that we can't afford, that we probably don't even want, but some advertiser has said that we want. Guy actually mentioned, he's like, the other industry that's deranged is advertising. That would also probably not be anywhere near as large as it is right now, had it not been for the misallocation of these resources. So, yeah, I think, like, coming back to even the original point, tyranny is probably the kind of problem that we experience on the field, on the plane, or in the paradigm that we're living in right now. So fundamentally, I actually think that Bitcoin is a solution to tyranny. Now, evil and bad, or even evil is like a concept that I don't fundamentally believe in, because evil and good, can be arguably subjective, right? But like, I think the problems that we'll be dealing with, the challenges and the conflicts, will be of a new order as we sort of transcend the plane and the paradigm within which we live now, which is, again, one that is quite arrogant and ignorant, particularly in relation to how nature and reality function. So I don't know if anyone wants to add anything to that, but that's sort of my thoughts on that piece.
I would add one thing about, well, let me just say this first about evil. And I quoted this in my most recent piece, which is titled Our Most Brilliant Idea. But John Milton wrote in Paradise Lost that evil is the knowledge that believes itself complete.
Yes.
And that's what fucking central banking is, right?
Yes.
These guys think you can just push the buttons and the levers and that they have more knowledge than the complex adaptive system that is the world economy possesses, right? And that's why, that's fundamental to why it's an institution of evil. And then I'll just touch on one other thing that I've been thinking about. I don't know that I can articulate it well, but I do want to, whatever, we're cosmic, so let's talk about it. You mentioned problems and problem solving. I've actually started to think that, again, the game of macroeconomics is to solve problems, right? What does, give the market or society what it wants, better, faster, cheaper, right? Even if it's not articulated, it's for you to go and figure out. But so in that way, the price signal is what draws our attention to problems, right? When something's expensive, that's where all of our attention shifts to resolve that thing and make it cheaper. So monetary inflation is artificially increasing our problems, right? We're increasing the size, literally the price of our problems is a proxy for the problems we're trying to solve. So if we could strip the theft out of the economic system and let innovation naturally deflate prices, we actually create more freedom for ourselves to go and solve higher and bigger problems, right? If you think prices are shrinking, like the prices of everyday things that we're getting smarter and better at making, they should decline as we become more, we're producing them more intelligently. And that gives us more freedom of attention to allocate it towards larger problems. So I think inflation is actually increasing our perception of problems in the world and our actual problems.
Yeah, it's mispricing problems. I think that's such a really good point there. It's mispricing problems. So what should actually cost X amount to solve is now 10x what it should be, right, because of the derangement syndrome that inflation central banking is producing. And I think also to your point earlier is evil is that which thinks it's complete. That's fundamentally the utopian ideal of the statists. And despite what some might say is, it's not about a utopia and everything, their intention is, or the whole statist assumption is that through some sort of central management we can achieve a better world, and the direction of a utopia, quote unquote. So again, that is fundamentally flawed, because there is no there is no end state. That completion, that final thing doesn't exist.
It's arrogance, right? It's arrogance in the world to think that there's a worldly authority. And that's what, again, back into the domain of the religious or whatever, but we need authorities that are higher than ourselves to orient ourselves. Is what God is, and Bitcoin is. And the last thing I'll hit on, that you mentioned we've created this society that wants likes and whatnot. I don't think it's any coincidence, actually, that fiat currency leads to these dopaminergic business models that are designed to stimulate dopamine, right? It's high sugar, opiates, social media likes, just live fast, die young business models. And that's somehow related to fiat currency inflation expanding our problem set.
It's a time preference skew, right? Because it's fundamentally destroyed our our innate, because we're all living creatures, and we all like you said earlier, we live in this spatio-temporal sort of plane, and we innately experience time ourselves, and and as we distort the very fabric through which we're all connected, money being this plane of time and energy, we distort our own behavior. And and coming back to enlightenment through Bitcoin is, Bitcoin is sort of the new enlightened league, because we're recalibrating our own internal time preference. We're recalibrating our own clock, against something that is far more objective, and incorruptible, which is such a powerful thing. And this is where religion, I've got a question here, is Bitcoin touches so many areas, physics, philosophy, religion, economics, ethics, morality, like all these sorts of things. And I think the more, we dig down this, the more we can find, how deep the roots go, which is to me another really profound thing.
Yeah, I think the term that I think it was Pierre who coined it, the high velocity trash economy. That's exactly right. Like the current fiat standard produces a high velocity trash economy. And that's exactly, producing everything that maximizes dopamine pretty much. And it's obvious again that Bitcoin lowers your time preference, and time preference touches everything. Like it's related to your morals, to starting a family, to so many other things. But I also think that I have this inkling that time preference isn't everything. Maybe it is, and maybe I'm seeing it wrong. But I've met so many people now that, to use your phrase now, were enlightened by Bitcoin, and they were like, there are some people that had profound experiences, myself included, and I cannot link that back to just a change in time preference. It was more of wrestling with this incorruptible substance, to use Rob's term, and as I saw it, to trying to wrestle with this idea of absolute truth, like capital T truth, and not only being in awe of something that is greater than yourself and will outlive you, but also being involved in it and building on it and helping it get out of the door, for example. I think it's out of the door now. I think that's obvious, but still, it's a very humbling experience, and I think most people and also most Bitcoiners underestimate the well, you guys obviously don't, but I think still most people do underestimate the profundity of the matter. Like it's in a world that's so steeped in chaos and tyranny, why not align yourself with something that represents truth and purity and honesty? Yeah. And I think it changes you in very profound ways once you do that.
So to your point there, though, so this alignment with truth and the purity, that is Bitcoin. Has that lengthened your own time horizon, like this knowledge, or that you're participating in something that will outlive you, and has it like lengthened your own perception of time horizon, as opposed to thinking about just next month? Do you think about
definitely
long term?
Like, yeah. I worked out a multi-year plan for myself and my family, and I think I would have done that if it weren't for Bitcoin, because times were just too uncertain. I started a family because of Bitcoin. I don't think I would have started a family if it weren't for Bitcoin. I also mentioned it before, I don't intend to spend my sats anytime soon. Like I intend to inherit my sats to my children, like 90+% of it. Like I have no reason to spend. I still earn an income, and I have a comfortable life. Why should I get a Lambo or anything? I mean, what the fuck? And so it definitely changed all of that. I also think I think it's obvious that nothing has even started yet. Like we haven't even warmed up yet. Bitcoin has multiple eras, and we are still in the reward era. Like we haven't even entered the era yet where fees outpace the block reward. So, and it's the reward era ends in approximately 2140. So this is still a long time, and that's when Bitcoin might get started for real. I think it won't even take that long. Like I famously said, we're halfway there when it comes to hyper-Bitcoinization. So I think it will happen in the next 9 years approximately. But it's a very weird concept, because it's very hard to say when hyper-Bitcoinization happened, in the same way that it's very hard to say when exactly the internet took over. When was the tipping point for the internet? And there's still billions of people offline. But the internet, hyper-internetization already happened. It's in the past. And you can't really pinpoint when it actually happened. And how do you measure it? Like how many bits of information were stored on the internet or communicated over the internet as compared to telephone lines and letters and so on, or stored in books. I mean, all of those notions are extremely nonsensical, because you have just YouTube alone produces more bits of information pretty much every 10 minutes than all the libraries combined. And so I think it will be the same in the monetary realm of Bitcoin. There's just no comparison. There's looking back, you probably won't know when the tipping point was, and if you zoom out far enough in terms of Bitcoin adoption, I think it will be obvious in hindsight when you zoom out and you see this very large S curve of adoption of just Bitcoin users and value stored in Bitcoin and transaction value per block transacted, and you will just see that it goes parabolic and then it has to peter off. Like, again, Bitcoin, when all is said and done, it will have a value of 0 because there's nothing else to compare it to. And but just when exactly the tipping point is very hard to tell. And I had insights in the past where I was convinced that it's already in the past, and most of the days I still am. I think we are past the tipping point already, and other people agree with me, and some say that the tipping point, for example, was the large crash in March this year, like when COVID hit and the lockdowns hit and the economy crashed and we had this big sell-off down to like 3,800 or whatever it was. And like, to me, it didn't even matter because nothing happened in cyberspace, like Bitcoin was just still going TikTok next block. Like, nothing happened to Bitcoin at all. Just some people got liquidated and had to sell. That's all. It was only in the outside world. It was only in the meat space world. In cyberspace, nothing happened. And some people pinpoint to that in terms of like the tipping point. Bitcoin didn't die there, and we're like on our way to recovery. And I think these kind of things and cycles will just continue. And looking back, it will be very, very hard to say when Bitcoinization, hyper-Bitcoinization happened. I think it will be very turbulent at times. I also think it won't happen all at once. I think just fiat currencies will default and collapse. And maybe when the euro collapses finally, or the US dollar collapses, that will be a point in time or a period in time where you can point to and say, like, this was the moment of hyper-Bitcoinization. This was the moment where Bitcoin took over completely. But as Max Kaiser likes to say as well, and other people as well, like, we are in the process of repricing the world in sats. And just some people are just ahead of the curve. Like, I know people personally that are on a sat standard, like they price everything in sats. And it's like, I count myself into this group because the only thing that matters for me is how many sats I have. Like, fiat money is that to me and has been for quite a long time. And I think we will continue to see all that, and it will just grow organically. And looking back, it will be very hard to tell when the tipping point was.
Yeah, I think speaking of tipping points, it's like they're always hard. Like, I used to use the analogy of, you can kind of remember a time when we all had the Nokia phones, and we all remember a time now that we all live in a time now that we all have smartphones, but you can't really pinpoint the date that it all changed. Like, it's kind of, there was one era, there was another era. And it's like, and we know that it kind of diffused through society, but it just seems to have happened so quickly. And like, I kind of chucked in this quote, I think, in that Bitcoin lockdowns article, is like this idea that, that it took, I think it'll take, the final 5 billion people that come onto Bitcoin will probably take as long as the first 5 million. And it's like that sort of acceleration phase is going to happen because, you've got multiple forces of, like, not only Bitcoin sort of being this black hole that just grows and, TikTok next block doesn't give a fuck. But you also have the panic that will ensue in the existing world that continues to crumble, whether from, ridiculous mandates, negative interest rates, I don't even want to think about what the kind of legislation they're going to have to impose over the coming years to pay for the clusterfuck that's been these global lockdowns. Like, the ramifications that's going to have. Like, they in their own arrogance and stupidity, they put the nail in the coffin. They put the nail in their own coffin, which is an interesting thing. But I'll throw just one last thing. I think, when you mentioned, your position on time preference, I think, we talked about you lengthening your time horizon. I think that is your individual manifestation of an adjustment in personal time preference that has occurred as a result of your introduction and involvement with Bitcoin. And I think that enlightenment fundamentally happens to us all. And now, our time preference, adjusts, individually, but I think collectively it begins to lower. And that therein lies the basis of, civilization and, transcending to better quality problems, as opposed to quibbling over the fucking crumbs that we're, all fighting about today, like a bunch of, crazy people.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's right, but I also think that it won't be as stark for most people. Like to draw a parallel to the internet, for example, or the free software movement. Some people were really deep down the internet and free information, free access to information, free exchange of information rabbit hole. And today, everyone is basically forced by society to use the internet. Just like you're forced to have an email address, you're forced to have a phone number, stuff like that. Like you're even forced to have a smartphone, because try getting a modern job without having a smartphone. Like that's what I mean by you're forced by society. You just can't function in society normally when you're not using the internet, not using a smartphone, and so on. And I think the same will be true for Bitcoin. And I think most people I think it will be a little bit different. I think we will have more radicals, quote unquote, in Bitcoin, because Bitcoin tends to radicalize because it's a radical idea. But I think that most people that are coming after the early adopters, like the 80% of people that will be forced by economic reality and society at large to adopt the Bitcoin standard as well, I think the change will be very subtle. It won't be as extreme as it was for the early adopters. I think the change will be societal and very, very subtle, as it was with the gold standard, for example, as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I fundamentally agree with that, because it takes a different kind of person and a different kind of personality to come into Bitcoin now. Like, look at us three lunatics. You're fucking dressed up as an invisible man. It takes a special kind of person to really come in now. But again, that's sort of the trade-off. The cost of being a contrarian today is being a little bit crazy, being a radical, being laughed at, having to hodl through 80% dips and all that sort of stuff. Like that's the price we pay. The other price we pay is like the fundamental and inherent risk of potentially being wrong. We also pay the price of potentially being targeted down the track for being quote unquote lucky. So we pay all those costs, now, and the reward for those costs is, like changing, like helping, fundamentally change the world and, help us transcend, the paradigm that we currently live in. But then, in true, natural capitalist nature, is because we're ahead of the curve, with this monetary phenomenon, there will also be an economic reward for this, because economics is fundamentally life. Like economics is the study of incentives and disincentives, in the framework of humans and the actions they take. So it's I agree with you. The time preference impact it will have on people will definitely be different. And those who are most prone to adjust their time preference are probably and most likely going to come to Bitcoin earlier. But, as with all things, human beings are all different, and, that's sort of going to evolve. I've got another bunch of questions here. I don't know, Rob, if you wanted to tie off this little section.
So I've got about a little less than 10 minutes. I got to get to dinner with the family here. But I do want to make a point that I think to me is like the pinnacle of the importance of Bitcoin. And I'll start out a little bit abstract. There's a term in mathematics called isomorphism. Or you could say something, when you say something is isomorphic to something else, it means it maps onto it somehow. So the word coin, for instance, right? When I say the word coin, for most people that speak English, it maps onto this conception of a hard metal monetary token. And so that's first, right? So the isomorphism is kind of the mathematical definition of meaning, right? That's what, when we say meaning, something is meaningful, we're saying it's isomorphic to something. But meaning has kind of a dual meaning, right? We could say, what do you mean? What do you mean by this word, or however you say it? But also things that are of intrinsic value to us, right? And I'm not using the intrinsic value in like the economic sense, which is not real. It's just something that is valuable to us, something that we enjoy for the sake of doing it. And we could say in a secular definition that God is that which is eternal, right? That which transcends space and time. So everything we've been talking about is related to space and time and thermodynamics, but there is at least believed to be in wisdom traditions around the world a transcendent reality even to space and time, right? That the below the surface of the black hole or beyond the edge of the universe, there's something eternal, right? This eternal doesn't mean it lasts forever. Eternal means it is outside of space and time. It's a higher dimension. It's somewhere else that we can't even comprehend. And I find it very interesting that innovation, right, the reshaping of the world in the shape of our ideas, basically, through innovation, we are attempting to transcend space and time, right? That's what productivity growth is. We're able to accomplish greater results with the same efforts, right? And through innovation, we can transcend space clearly much more quickly than we ever could. We can transcend time in terms of creating more free time for ourselves. So I think in that way, work is, and this is, biblical in a lot of ways, that work is the noble pursuit, right? We are pursuing the path of innovation, which helps us continuously transcend space and time such that we more closely approach the nature of God, even in a secular sense. I'm not trying to get super religious here. If you just hold out God as that which is transcendent. And that's what Bitcoin's doing really fundamentally, right? It's re-implementing the ethic of work into mankind, right? We've bent ourselves out of shape this way and that, robbing from each other, committing violence, theft, inflation, all these things. And that's why it's so important, right? We're re-implementing the ethic of work into humanity. And one of the things that Saylor said in our interview is he said to engineer is divine, actually. And that what we're doing when we're engineering is we're applying all of our faculties, right? Everything that we have, our tools, our wits, our know-how, onto nature, and we're solving problems. And we're solving problems not just for ourselves, but for everyone, forever, right? That's the nature of innovation. And that, to me, that's where the meaning of life lives. Because I think if you have to put it into words, meaning of life is people helping people, right? So that's what Bitcoin, by carrying us back into this ethic of work, helps us help more people over time, and in that sense carries us closer to God. That's like trying to put it in a nutshell.
Satoshi bless, brother. Satoshi bless. I have nothing to add to that.
I've just got one comment on that. It reminds me of something that I truly believe is that, in life we have two things to give, and that's our love and our labor. And like the notion of love is an interesting one as well. It's sort of, it's been explored in things like Interstellar as this sort of this energy that sort of transcends time, space, and all that sort of stuff. But also very like, have either of you actually read or been exposed to Hyperion, like Dan Simmons' work?
I have it on my reading list, that's all.
Oh my God, I cannot recommend it enough. Like I did it on Audible and it's just fantastic. Like I would highly recommend the Audible because the narrator is brilliant, but I just could not put it down. And he sort of weaves that narrative in there. I'd be surprised if Nolan didn't if I'd be surprised if Nolan wasn't inspired by Hyperion for Interstellar. Like I think it's such a love and labor. They're our mechanisms for transcending, the socio-temporal existence we have, which is another powerful rabbit hole. In the spirit of Rob only having like 10-20 minutes, I want to throw a couple other chunks in here. So a quick man, there's so many questions I want to hit, but let's maybe talk about, or from so that the listeners can kind of fall down this rabbit hole, because one of the questions I have in here is like, what did the slippery slope into Bitcoin look like for you? And it's like, where did it sort of start and where did it go? So let's answer that question. Then I want to hit two, which is books and heroes. But who wants to go first on like a bit of a description on what that slippery slope looked like for you?
I think we'll need another like 3-hour podcast to go into that.
Look, we're gonna have to do it. I think we're gonna have to do a question number 2. But let's maybe touch on it for the future.
For me, like I think my rabbit hole story is kind of well known. The thing I'm gonna say, to be just very brief, it took me forever. Like I had like 4 or 5 different touch points over years and years and years with Bitcoin, and it took me forever to really tumble down and truly get it. And I came from a computer science background, and for me it was just an interesting engineering thing and interesting technologically, and that's it. I didn't see it as money. I didn't understand money at all. I didn't understand economics. I didn't understand the implications. I didn't understand the profundity of it, and it was right before my face for years. Like I was literally working with someone who in 2013-14 built his own blockchain project, and I was laughing at him for years and years. So that's my background pretty much.
Was there, along that journey, could you sort of point out some personal tipping points, whether it's like any like work on like whether it's physics, philosophy, economics, or anything like that, or any particular authors, or any
I think I tried to write down these ideas in my article Bitcoin's Gravity, because I think it was so hard to get for me, because I was intrinsically opposed to many ideas embedded in Bitcoin, and I had to burn off like 85% of myself to align myself with Bitcoin. And I think pretty much like the truth that Bitcoin embodies wasn't my truth at the time, and I think that's why it was so hard for me to understand and accept. And I think a lot of people are in this boat still, and will be just naturally. And I was like, I believed all the FUD. I was hung up on all the main points, like proof of work doesn't solve any interesting problem, for example. Proof of work wastes a lot of energy, for example. There will be 1 million coins, it gets diluted by copies, it can be shut off, governments will ban it. I had to overcome all of these. It's not Turing complete. It can't do interesting smart contracts. It's not the world computer. Like my journey was so rocky and bloody. You guys have no idea. Like I fell into every trap. I started mining. I was trading for a while. I did all of it. The only thing I think I didn't do was cloud mining. That's the only thing I didn't do. But other than that, my path was very long and rocky, and I'm no Pierre Rochard who studied Austrian economics 10 years before he discovered Bitcoin and saw it at first glance, and he was like, that's it. So
Gigi, trust me, man, I can relate to you as well, because I didn't come from it. Like, although I was exposed to Austrian economics in the early days through sort of my pursuit of gold and silver in the in 2011 and 2012, but like I didn't come to it from that reason either. Like for me, it was a very bloody experience. And I'll go into my crap later. Rob, maybe give us a little bit about yours, and then I want to touch on like books and heroes, and then we'll wrap up episode 1 of the Cosmic Call.
Yeah, similar actually. I could not possibly explain it briefly, but equally although in a different way, brutal, violent, and bloody, falling down the rabbit hole. I would say for me, I had a pretty clear understanding that central banking was the black core of the world before Bitcoin, but I didn't have a lot of exposure to Austrian economics, actually. So it took me a while to see the light with Bitcoin. But I would say that the blood for me was more, I was very enmeshed in fiat reality. You know, I was a highly paid executive. I was traveling the world. I thought I was happy drinking and partying and all this, but that's looking back, it's like there was something very false to that whole existence. And now I find true, like, meaningful work through Bitcoin. And so there's a whole really deep story there, but that's kind of the general path. Did you want to do books and heroes? Or?
Yeah, let's do that, because I think yeah, with the time constraints, I'd love to actually dig into those origin stories, because what I want to do is I want to take people on a journey through, like, the blood, sweat, and tears that we all went through, because, you know, people who are, especially like people who are going to be class of now 2020, right, and 2021, they're going to go through a similar journey themselves, and I think having that you know, that path lit is going to be important. So I think let's cap this off with maybe the top 4 or 5 books and the top 4 or 5 like people or personas that have inspired you, like, and really sort of, you know, I guess everything seems to tie to Bitcoin for us anyway, but like in Bitcoin and in sort of broader terms in life, I think that's really important for people as well. Rob, you go first, man.
Yeah. I'll name some books that I think are really important. One I mentioned earlier is Maps of Meaning by Jordan Peterson. It's just a comprehensive exploration of meaning, and he goes through mythology and how it's woven into our socioeconomic fabric in ways we don't even understand. Like, for instance, capitalism is built on a Judeo-Christian substructure. Like, the idea or respect for private property rights is a Christian ideal. And he goes in not just Christianity, he goes into a lot of philosophy and mythology. It's a staggering book. It will break you. It's so painful to read, but it will change you in a good way. Another book that opened my eyes to the parallels between science and mysticism was a book called The Tao of Physics, written by Frigyes Capra. This was, I think, written in the 90s. I'm sorry, I read it when I was young, so I may have read it in the 90s. It was actually written in the 70s, I think. But he just draws parallels between quantum physics and like Taoist philosophy. So it's a very, very interesting book. The book Anti-Fragile by Nassim. I've read all his books. I read that one twice. That's a mind, you know, anyone that hasn't read that book, it's just a must. I think it helps you comprehend Bitcoin from a lot of different angles. And I think Nassim is probably one of the best writers I've ever read. There's another book online on Mises.org. It's a free PDF called Honest Money by Gary North. It's a very accessible, simple book on Austrian economics. It is explained through a biblical lens, but you don't have to read it that way. It's a very first principles read on Austrian economics for anyone that hasn't read it. There's another book called Think on These Things by Krishnamurti. He was a famous Eastern philosopher, and I don't know, I cried like 3 times reading the book. I don't really know how to describe it. It's just books of his. He go around and give speeches to people, and he's talking about it's philosophy. So he's talking about the deep aspects of being. And I would say there's one other book too that called Dishonest Money. That was a summary of The Creature from Jekyll Island. And I read that many years ago. I was young. I was 20 probably. But that's what woke me up to central banking even before Bitcoin. So that one was, I would say, either the Jekyll Island is the long version, or you read Dishonest Money is the short version.
Cool. And then maybe some who are sort of some inspirational figures for you that you sort of that have inspired you? Like, I'm assuming Jordan Peterson is going to be in that list.
Yeah, and this is new actually. Jordan Peterson, I've only discovered him the past 2 years probably.
Yeah.
But he's rapidly, I've just been consuming his content nonstop. It's incredible. Check out his lectures. If you feel what he's saying, check out his books. I actually, this is going to be quite the pivot, but I would put Arnold Schwarzenegger and The Rock. When I was a kid, I was into working out, and I read their books. I read Schwarzenegger's bodybuilding encyclopedia, and I read The Rock's autobiography. And they're both just machines, right? They just work.
Have you read Total Recall by Schwarzenegger?
No.
Total Recall is his best, man. I've read all of his stuff. Total Recall is by far the best. Like, really? He's definitely fucking, when I was younger, he was literally in my top 3. But Total Recall is a fucking fantastic book. In fact, that brought me back from the brink of, sorry to digress here, but back when I was 24, 25, I had this big blow up with a business that, like, after I made my first $1 million, I lost everything. And like, I kind of went on this sabbatical. I spent some time in LA, and then I basically sold all my belongings, left to Bali I bought a cancelable ticket on the way back. So I canceled my ticket, and my idea was that I was going to go live in the fucking jungle in Indonesia on some island. And it was Total Recall, that book, that made me question, like, or prodded me, like, what the fuck are you running away from? Like, reading Arnie's story from, a kid in Graz to, like, he's how he escaped the fucking army to go win the, the Munich, Junior Mr. Bodybuilder, Junior Mr. Body, whatever it was. And then, like, getting to America, like, and he's one of the rare individuals who's really hit the pinnacle of, like, 4 unrelated industries, like sport, business, politics, and movies. So it's like, So anyway, sorry to digress there, but I highly recommend Total Recall.
Sounds interesting. They just had an influence on my life. I think helping me be hardworking. Mm-hmm. I mentioned Nassim earlier, like the way he thinks, like, I think he's a living Aristotle or something. He's very profound the way he thinks and sees the world. And then I think Joe Rogan actually is a pretty impressive guy to me too. That you talked about Schwarzenegger being across different spectrums, but Joe Rogan's kind of like that, right? He's very intelligently funny. He's intelligently, like, I guess, skeptical. He's a fighter, right? He's into psychedelics. He's into self-development. He's probably the most powerful interviewer that ever lived. He's got 1 billion+ downloads a year. So I think he's just an impressive guy as well. I don't know. I guess that would be it for me.
Cool. Gigi, what about you, man?
Yeah, tough question, especially because I have such a high overlap with Rob's picks as well. Like, Jordan Peterson was very influential to me as well. And I fell down this particular rabbit hole of meaning a couple of years ago. And I also consumed pretty much all his content and read his books. I read a lot, and I read very broadly. I think one book that was that had a big I'll start with people. I think the person, except for Jordan Peterson, that influenced me most is Richard Feynman. I think his drive to really understand things deeply, and also deriving a pleasure of finding things out, it really made a huge impression on me when I was younger. And in general, like, I don't necessarily have too many heroes. I think there are many people that are very interesting, but I also think that, we're all human. We all have our flaws, and it's very dangerous to think of people too highly, so to speak. I think that's why I love also in the Bitcoin space, you know, that we have a tendency to slay our heroes. I think that's important as well. But definitely Richard Feynman and Jordan Peterson were insanely influential to me. And yeah, in terms of books, it's really hard. Like, I mostly read nonfiction, and Robert mentioned many of the books. I actually, in terms of Bitcoin, the books that were most influential to me are all listed on bitcoinresources.com. So that's my curation of things that were meaningful to me and helped me really understand Bitcoin. And a lot of works that Robert mentioned are listed there as well. In terms of nonfiction, for some reason, Ender's Game really had an impact on me when I read it. I think it was a really interesting sci-fi story, and there are some works that were deeply meaningful to me at the time when I read them. The Egg, for example, is a short story that was
The Egg's a good one. Yeah.
That was really impactful at the time when I read it, and also Flowers of Algernon, if you know that. It's about it's highly valued in the AI circles. Like, it's about intelligence and how a person becomes more intelligent and becomes super intelligent, so to speak. And also the works by Ray Kurzweil were quite influential for me as well in my thinking. I think he is spot on many things, and he is a profoundly deep thinker when it comes to just exponential technologies and artificial intelligence in general and stuff like that. So all of those things are interesting and fascinating, and I think they're currently playing out. I mean, aside from Bitcoin, we have some other profound transformations in the realm of AI and computers and networking that just change a lot of things in this world. And I think that's basically it. Like, there are some people that were very helpful along the way, but I don't align with too closely anymore. Like Matt Dillahunty, for example, he's one of the rational atheists, so to speak, and he's a very principled thinker and very articulate as well. But I also think, after listening to Jordan Peterson for thousands of hours, that he has many things wrong. They actually had a debate, and it was really enlightening watching this debate, and they arrived at the crux of a disagreement. And I think it is the basic crux of religious thinking and atheistic thinking. And I recommend everyone to watch that. I think I recommended it to Knut Svanholm twice or thrice, because he's steadfast on Bitcoin being the atheistic many, and I disagree. But I also know where he's coming from, you know, like, I was in the same camp for the longest time. So yeah, that's basically it. That's what comes to mind. But also my brain is kind of fried, and it's really hot under the suit. So
okay, all right. Well, look, I'll throw my ones out there, and then we'll wrap this baby up. So for me, I think similar to you guys, like, particularly this year, like I first discovered Jordan's work about 5 years ago, and then I went a little bit in, and then I kind of left it for a while. But particularly in the last 2 years, like, and if I think about even throughout this year, like, you know, during this whole lockdown and shit like that, I mean, I have gone through just about every single video and lecture that I could of his, and I just, like, whether I'm in the gym or running or doing anything, like, I've just always got, you know, well, not always Jordan, but mostly Jordan and things like that playing. So he's definitely been an influential character. I think, I mean, as you said, all heroes are flawed. Like, I still believe in the idea of heroes, in the sense that they're people who have attributes that, you know, that we can aspire toward. And I think that's really important, because, like, I put up a tweet a little while ago saying, you know, when we trade aspiration for acceptance, you know, we end up in a world that, you know, becomes that settles on the worst of us, instead of you know, struggling and aspiring to become the best of us. So I think for me, you know, the notion of, you know, extraordinary people is extremely important, because that's sort of what drives us forward. So Jordan's been an influential person for me. Steve Jobs is definitely hugely influential for me. I think you know, from a young age, someone who was, you know, people have tried to emulate him in every sort of way possible. Like, because, you know, he was the original, like hard-headed, I'm going to dent the universe type entrepreneur. And I mean, he even came up with that notion of, putting a dent in the universe. I think that was extraordinarily powerful. I mean, Arnold would be there. I don't agree with much of Arnold's stuff anymore. I think he's become extremely soft, but he was definitely, for me when I was younger, a huge inspiration. And just seeing the kind of like, particularly like his character, when he was young, he was extraordinary person. I'd throw Tony Robbins in there as well. Like if you haven't watched the Netflix special, I'm Not Your Guru, like Robbins is again one of those people who, I think has stood the test of time and have gone through the blood, guts and spit and shit that you need to go through in life to actually earn your stripes. And he's a fucking profound human being, like, someone with an extraordinary presence that I recommend a lot of people know him through like the dorky books from when he was younger and some of his power talks and shit like that. Fuck all that stuff. Like, look at his modern stuff, like where he's older and more mature. It's next level. Like, I'd put him definitely in the realm of a Jordan in terms of depth and profundity. And then I think also I'll throw two more in there, like Murray Rothbard, who's I think really the fountainhead of articulating libertarianism, and then Ayn Rand, who was able to take the philosophy of objective reality and objectivism and weave that into one of the most powerful narratives ever written in Atlas Shrugged. I think is like she was one of the most powerful women in history. So that's sort of like people for me. And then books, I would definitely like Sovereign Individual, like, saying what everyone's probably read listening to this. A Libertarian Manifesto by Murray Rothbard is like one of the most powerful books on thinking about how a free, voluntary and libertarian society would function. And then you can start to really see how Bitcoin sort of solves a couple of the issues in there. Hans Hermann Hoppe, Democracy, the God That Failed. I cannot recommend that book more. Like, it's such a powerful book. I would throw in there, like, from a meaning and philosophical standpoint, or psychology, I would throw in Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. So Viktor Frankl was a psychologist, psychiatrist who ended up in Auschwitz. Super, super, super powerful book, and shows you how, and Jordan Peterson talks about this a lot, is like the pursuit of meaning over the pursuit of happiness. Such a, and it's short, but extraordinarily powerful. Like, that'll move you, it'll make you cry when you're reading that book. Ayn Rand, Atlas Shrugged, of course, like that's a must read. That is probably at the top of my list in terms of books and like their power and their strength. And then if I had to throw a Nassim Taleb one in there, like my favorite from him is Skin in the Game, because I just think skin in the game as a concept is like, skin in the game is the antidote to symmetry in the world. And Rob, you were talking about this on Stefan's podcast the other day with the status dude. Is symmetry is how we symmetry is at the foundation of like a voluntary society, right? And as soon as we start to create institutions of asymmetry, which is effectively what the government is, or what central bank is, or what any other monopoly is, it's an asymmetric institution. We create distortion. So symmetry is powerful, and the only way to have symmetry is to have skin in the game. And I think Nassim really, 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 really tied that off in that book. So they would be, my books, and the sort of the people that I find extraordinarily aspirational. And obviously there's many, many more. Like, we can go into Isaac Newton and Alexander the Great and all that sort of stuff. But let's boys, let's wrap this one up here, unless there's any comments on the shit that I just rambled on. But yeah, look, this was like one of the most cosmic, or this is the most cosmic call that I've had, and I hope it's one of the most cosmic ones out there. We are 100% going to do a round 2 of this, because I had 10 questions and I think we only got through 3. So maybe we're gonna have to do 2 or 3 of these suckers. But I really, really, really appreciate you guys. Rob, thank you for taking a bit of time extra. I know you got the family waiting, and Gigi, you suffocating in the suit. Thank you guys. If there's any final comments, please make a mention of where people can find you, follow you, and some final comments.
Yeah, I'll go first. First of all, a huge shout out to you two guys. Like the stuff you're putting out is phenomenal. And Robert, whatever you're doing, please keep going. Like something profound is going to come out. I know it already has, and I'm looking forward to reading your book. And yeah, for myself, you can, like, the best way to follow me is on Twitter, probably at Gigi. I also have the accompanying domain gigi.com, where you can find all my writing. I'm doing my best to decentralize not only myself but also all my things. So I'm trying to move away from Medium and Twitter and other things, and just move towards the bright orange future that is very hard to shut down.
Thank you, Gigi. Rob?
This absolute honor. The work you guys are doing is amazing. I love Svetski's zero fucks voice, and Gigi, your cosmic philosophical material. I mean, you're the man. I love, I guess, whatever. We're both disciples of Peterson, so birds of a feather. I'm on Twitter, Breedlove22. I've got links to all my stuff there. I would love to do another round of this. This is definitely the most cosmic I've ever gone on Bitcoin. I love being at that edge of understanding, trying to articulate. Now I gotta go. Until next time.
All right, guys.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Gigi, all right, so I think Rob's bounced. All right, so dude, thank you fucking so much for this. This was like, I've had an awesome time, man. I really.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. Thanks for having us. Thanks for alpha testing my invisible idea. You will see a lot more of where that's coming from. You know, like again, I have big plans, and once we breach all-time highs, I'm gonna pull out the orange-colored glasses, and it's gonna be great, man. Like I finally found a way to appear on video podcasts and other things, and it's gonna be glorious.
This is one of the silver linings of the lockdown and Zoom having to accelerate their stuff is the invisible man.
Yeah, it's gonna be great.
All right, man. Well, look, I'll actually wrap this up. I actually want to keep that piece. So, like, thank you again, everyone, for listening. I really appreciate this. Share this around. I mean, I'm not as active as I wanted to be on this channel, but you know, I'm going to look to do a bunch of these specials. We're 100% going to do a second one with Rob and Gigi, and go into a bunch of other topics and elements and our journeys and all that sort of stuff. So thank you for listening to this. Share it around, clip it, quote it, do all those sorts of things. This kind of information. Like, I think, you know, what Gigi mentioned before was like being surprised at how quickly Michael Saylor like sort of got in. I think that was almost impossible during the last cycle, but I think it's because of work from, you know, yourself, from Robert, from all this sort of stuff, like the caliber of, you know, content and, you know, thinking that has come through in the past couple of years, particularly from like, you know, the school of 2017 and 2016, like, has been next level, man. And I think this is what needs to continue to be perpetuated. And I mean, there's no better community out there. There's no more like absolutely intolerant community out there than the Bitcoiners. So I know that it will be. So yeah, man.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can't wait to see what the class of 2020 has to bring. And I'm sure there will be many people that will share their cosmic thoughts as well and build up on stuff by Robert and everyone else. And yeah, it's going to be great. Like, it's going to be a lot of fun as well. It's going to be chaotic. It's going to be painful, but it's going to be a lot of fun as well.
It's like we're becoming parents now, and we're going to see the new kiddies grow up in their generation.
That's how it goes.
Thank you again, Gigi.
All right, brother. Thanks again for having me, and yeah, take care.
Absolutely, bro. Thank you.